Great. All right, I guess we can get started. Hey everyone, thanks for coming on to this week's AMA. Obviously, Derek and Carl from the Reverie team thought it would be a really good opportunity to run through the Ops subDAO proposal with the community so they can talk through it in greater detail and answer any questions to those listening in. To give everyone a really quick TLDR of the agenda today, me and Josh will be asking a few questions to the Reverie team based on comments on Commonwealth and some that we've thought of additionally. And then it would be great for everyone in the audience to engage here and bring your thoughts and questions up to the stage after we've rattled off our questions. And if people aren't comfortable speaking in public, then by all means post your questions in the Trading General channel and we'll do our best to keep an eye on this and ask them at the end. Okay, it's pretty simple. Let's get started. I guess Derek and Carl, I guess for those who don't know you guys in the community and are new to the ecosystem, it would be awesome for you guys to just do like an intro, explain what Reverie does, both in the kind of current dYdX ecosystem and maybe outside as well.
Yeah, for sure. So Reverie was launched over a year ago now, actually, as basically a governance advisory shop where we work across a few different protocols on different levels. It varies on each protocol, but basically we take a very hands-on approach to helping out with scaling the DAO, growing the community, improving community engagement, and helping with general protocol growth in whatever measure we see as best fit and whatever is kind of available to us. So with dYdX, we've been active for also pretty much like I would say a year is when we kind of joined and started working closely across different levels, and most actively through the grants program, which Reverie helped launch at the beginning of this year in January. And we have since been serving as grants lead. We obviously had grants B1 run for the beginning of the year, and then we had grants B1.5 launch this summer with us remaining on as grants lead. We've taken on a few different other projects. We have the new asset listing working group. We've helped work across a few different proposals, and we've kind of tried to make our voice heard and kind of help out wherever possible as well, and kind of help guide the protocol towards sustainable and scalable growth. We also, we work across a few different protocols in similar ways, but it does vary based on like the community, the team, and everything like that. But that's kind of generally how we operate on a day-to-day.
Awesome. I guess based on that, then it'd be great for you to just kind of touch on your experience with DAOs, subDAOs. I mean, are there any lessons you can take from those who have done well? What's not worked, and what's been a success in the industry as a whole?
Yeah, happy to jump in. I think it's a great question. We've been involved in a few different kinds of subDAOs, I think, both in dYdX and outside. We've experienced the highs, the lows, and I think we've certainly learned a lot about best practices. Grants is obviously for the most visible example within dYdX, but there's other things around, also brainstorm some ideas around a new asset listing group, among other things. And I think, the main sort of thing I would emphasize is like subDAOs, the main purpose is really to create a middle ground for these communities to make decision-making a little bit more efficient and targeted while still having some kind of checks and balances that the community can have. So I think that's really the driving motivation behind why subDAOs fundamentally matter at all. And for them to operate effectively, I think there's really two things. You need to identify and have the right people in place to make decisions. So if the subDAO's focus is on risk, ideally you want folks with a risk background that are trustworthy and incentivized to make the correct recommendations. If it's a subDAO focused on treasury management, similar thing. And I think that's pretty intuitive. I would say the other sort of important area, I think, is just communication and transparency. I think that is something that's fundamentally critical to how subDAOs both are perceived, but also just how successful their work is overall. I think like communication in terms of just what the subDAOs are doing, where they're focused on, and being open about some of the challenges they're facing. I think that's really, really important. Otherwise, I mean, we've seen this in dYdX. Like, yeah, people will sometimes assume the worst, and so it just goes from there. But I think, yeah, definitely, I think subDAOs are a great innovation and have a lot more thoughts on how they can be done.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Derek. That's really good context. I guess what might be helpful as well now is if Josh, if you want to jump in and give some context around the dYdX Foundation's blog post, that would be really helpful.
Happy to. Thanks, James. So for everybody who hasn't had the chance to read it, I would encourage you to head over to the Foundation's blog. On November 2nd, we released a post called "A Take on the dYdX DAOs Near Future," and can just give you guys a quick summary now. I think looking at the state of affairs kind of going on in the DAO, we thought it was extremely important to draw the community's focus and attention towards evaluating the state of the dYdX DAO at different time intervals, specifically today and like currently what the structure of the DAO looks like, what the structure of the DAO should look like at the launch of dYdX v4, which is targeted for Q2 of 2023, and to really start brainstorming and thinking about what actionable steps need to be taken to get from point A to point B. Why this is, again, is just because dYdX v4, for anybody who doesn't know, obviously we're quite excited about it in the ecosystem, but dYdX v4 will be fully decentralized and open source. Really important to have a bunch of different subDAOs who can execute and fulfill the functions to keep the exchange running, as well as to kind of bolster up the dYdX community. But at this moment in time, I would say only subDAO really inside of the dYdX ecosystem is in fact the dYdX grants program. And we felt that to kind of spark discussion about what the future of the dYdX DAO will look like, we decided to release this blog post, which essentially outlines that an operations subDAO is most likely essential for the success of the dYdX DAO in the future for the reasons outlined in the blog post, but in a shorter summary, essentially. The main deliverable that we saw there was essentially the establishment of a sort of playbook that other subDAOs could follow in terms of if a community member wants to form a subDAO after the operation subDAO is formed, it really does reduce a lot of the barriers to entry. I think a lot of people have questions about, what should the formal legal entity structure look like? How should things inside of the subDAO be structured? What does optimal management of the subDAO look like? So really, the operation subDAO, as we saw it, if the community decides to form it, would involve assisting with all of those things I just mentioned. So posted the potential roadmap and take on the dYdX DAO's position on November 2nd. And had Reverie put a proposal forward in the recent past, I think last week. So we'll turn it over to Reverie just to hear a little bit more about their proposal and their decision to put the proposal forward. I think would be great for the dYdX community.
Yeah, absolutely. So, thanks for that context so that anybody who hasn't had a chance to read it is a bit more in the loop. But yeah, when you guys put that out, for us, it was just like, we totally resonate with this vision that you've laid out, and we absolutely agree on that Reverie that this makes a lot of sense for the growth of the dYdX DAO. You know, if you look at it today, there isn't really any sort of structure. There is only the grants program, and then there's like everybody else contributing on a very flat level. And so as we scale towards V4, where suddenly protocol ownership is placed on community members, decision-making is suddenly distributed in that flat environment. And what we've seen across other protocols is that brings progress and development and changes to very quick halt, where suddenly, you know, you don't have people taking ownership. And when they do, you have everybody kind of arguing over what the best process is and how to move forward. And so really, yeah, that's where subDAOs come in, and they create this awesome structure for the community to depend on mutual contributors who are voted into specific functions that drive protocol growth in their specific areas. And given how much like we do within this space, given our experience setting up the grants trusts and other legal entities outside of dYdX, our experience with the New Asset Working Group, we just kind of felt like this really resonated with us, the Operation subDAO, and we felt like we are well equipped to drive this forward and kind of present the community with the really best possible interpretation of this Operation subDAO and of the DAO playbook that is going to be our primary responsibility, which really the goal is to then deliver this playbook for the community so that community members immediately have an efficient way of setting up new subDAOs that can take ownership of these protocol functions and continue to drive growth. Obviously, our background, you know, we are very active across multiple DAOs. We've set up legal entities, subDAOs, working groups. I myself have 5 years of experience in operations at a large market making firm in crypto. And so like when it comes to the operational piece of this subDAO, that's my home and I feel very comfortable there. And I know that I'll be able to apply all of my experience there. And so, yeah, this just like really spoke to us, and we felt like we would be able to be great contributors, and we kind of feel very passionate about this. And we learned from the grants trust that there is a lot of nuances to setting up these legal entities, and that's kind of where we hope to apply the knowledge that we've learned to this playbook so that community members don't have to make the same mistakes, they don't have to go through the same barriers we did, and they can just immediately turn to this document and kind of like walk through of how to go about this process. Because just to clarify, if it isn't immediately clear, these subDAOs will need to establish themselves as legal entities. And the legal entities will vary depending on the functions of the subDAO. They're not all going to be currency purpose trusts as we set up for the grants and as we plan to set up for this subDAO. And so there's just a lot of different questions as to like, okay, well, is it a purpose trust? Is it a gaming foundation? Is it some other type of entity? What do we do? How do we go about this and everything? And that's the goal here, is because we've experienced all of that before.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Carl. And then obviously the playbook you were just talking about, who gets to decide if Reverie should receive, let's say, the dollar publication fee outlined in the blog post?
Yeah, that's a fair comment, right? The way that I envision it, I think it should be pretty straightforward for everybody to come to an agreement that, yes, we did deliver on this responsibility. And that's just by the actual like timely publication of this playbook. And I think everybody will be able to evaluate it in a way that it makes sense, it's accessible, and it delivers on all of these kind of promises that we're making with regards to guiding efficient community establishment of future subDAOs. On top of that, we have the fellow trustees and our enforcer, right, who do act as additional checks and balances on the work that we're doing. And they can basically act on top of like the community with regards to assessing the deliverable of the playbook. the reason we chose to split the payment in this way is to hold ourselves and for the community to be able to hold us accountable to that primary goal of this subDAO, right? And we expect future subDAOs to follow similar structures where rather than just paying us a flat monthly fee and hoping that we deliver on this, we hold ourselves accountable to like the ultimate goal of establishing this subDAO.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then moving on to sort of the formation of the Ops subDAO as a Guernsey trust, why did you decide to form it in that way? And are there any significant lessons learned in the process of that?
Yeah. Feel free to go for it, Derek.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, in terms of so I think it's important to mention first that as part of this Ops Trust playbook, we will explore many different kinds of legal entities aside from the Guernsey Trust. Some examples could be things like Amen Foundation, a BVI Foundation, potentially a few others. I think part of our research will be, again, going into like, depending on a subDAO's behavior and focus, are certain legal entities better or worse? I would say our thoughts right now is based on the legal advice that we've gotten that the focus of the Ops subDAO means that it's better suited to a guarantee purpose trust. We're familiar with it through the Grants Trust, and it's just a structure that we know how to operate and are comfortable with overall. So
thanks for that, Derek. That's really helpful. AX07, I'll get you up at the end of this, and then we can you can ask any questions you like. Moving on to the next one. I mean, you've had some comments on Commonwealth about a potential conflict of interest there. I mean, is there any conflict of interest with Reverie being the enforcer of the DGP and a trustee of the Ops subDAO?
Yeah, again, a very fair question. But if you look at the responsibilities outlined, we really don't see any conflict there. No grants will be issued with regards to the Ops subDAO, and the Ops subDAO will never involve itself with the grants budget or the grants program in any way. These are two totally separate entities with different objectives. Looking further ahead as well, as the DAO grows, I think it's reasonable and just possible to expect long-standing community members to serve on multiple subDAOs based on their experience and backgrounds. So you might see on more than one occasion, it's possible that the community member is an enforcer on subDAO A and a trustee on subDAO B. And I think this it's not something that we should rule out as like can never happen, because it does, it just turns back to like, given the knowledge that we've gained from serving as enforcer on the DGP, that's what makes us a qualified trustee for this entity, right? And you can see similar like patterns evolve further down the line. And so as long as there isn't any way for us to benefit from this trust with regards to our enforcer role, then there really isn't any conflict, and we don't see any sort of correlation or linkage there.
Nice. Thanks for that, Carl. And then moving on to like how Reverie plans to keep the community updated on their progress. I mean, is there anything, lessons learned or anything you're going to, I guess, optimize for keeping the community updated on the progress here?
Yeah, for sure. So we want to obviously, as Derek had mentioned, right, subDAO success is largely dependent on communication and transparency and the ability for community members to hold subDAO contributors accountable to the responsibility and the goals outlined. For us, that means sharing monthly reports that kind of go into detail as to like the work that we've done in that prior month, updates with regards to our balances and sharing initial drafts or whatever it might be on the work that we're doing. I also imagine we can open up a channel similar like we have with the grants program where we can share progress and people can ask us questions and we can be available as I try to be at all times with regards to community questions. And there was also a comment about like the bank account, and I think we can probably spin up like a really quick website that just like hosts some of our progress and some of the content that we're doing. And in that we should, I don't want to overpromise there because it kind of depends on the bank that we go with. And I have faced some pretty poor banking tech infrastructure in my days, but 90% of the banks out there do have a pretty easily digestible API that we should be able to set up like a dashboard that tracks and kind of provides a live update of all of our like, fiat activity. And we'll obviously include banking statements as well with the monthly reports so that people can audit everything that we're doing and make sure that things are just going on.
That's brilliant. Yeah, that makes sense. Obviously, in your post on Commonwealth, you kind of touched on like operational and legal expenses. Can you give any examples of what some of that might entail?
Yeah, definitely. So, we'll first need to spend money on legal counsel to help actually establishing the entity. And what that means really is getting Guernsey counsel to draft a trust agreement and like any other relevant documentation to formalize and stand up this entity. And so that's going to be like the immediate legal expense. But then going forward, based on our activity and our responsibilities, we will pretty much always need to turn to legal just confirmation or guidance, when it comes to the bank account that we're going to open, when it comes to working with different service providers and the agreements that we have to sign to make sure that the DAO and the subDAO is protected at all times. In our experience with the grants trust, like there's always going to be agreements to sign and work to be done with regards to updating that requires legal help and as such requires expensing. On the operational side, we have plans to obviously open up a bank account that isn't free, right? That costs money. So already you have that. And then you have this idea of the ops subDAO being responsible for establishing communication channels that the DAO can depend on. For example, Slack, or essentially taking ownership of the Discord, the Gather Town that was set up through grants. The ops subDAO could be responsible for paying that so that it moves away from grants' responsibility. There's also like probably other service providers that we're going to use, right? And all of those are just operational expenses that we have to account for. And this subDAO can basically be responsible for paying for on behalf of the DAO going forward. So that like if the DAO, right, like wants to set up a Slack, who pays for that? The answer here would be the ops subDAO does, and that's their operational expense.
That makes sense. Yeah, thanks, Carl. And last few questions, I guess, from us. I mean, you pretty much touched on, I think, most of this, but do you anticipate any hurdles to forming this subDAO and following through with the deliverables?
It's in this space, right? You never, it's unwise to try to predict further than even like an hour from now. But from our initial assessment and just kind of like the work that we did in building this proposal and getting some initial guidance, we're not seeing any immediate blockers as to being able to follow through with this. Obviously, the DAO playbook, we feel very happy with our competency and like background with regards to building that. The ones where it might get a bit trickier and maybe we might see more hurdles than what we're anticipating is things like the bank account and some other kind of more TradFi environments where, especially given the current happenings in the space, that might set us back a little bit. But from what I can tell, I'm very optimistic that we can accomplish all the responsibilities outlined within the time frame that we've set up of 6 months. Yeah, and obviously we would keep the community immediately aware of any sort of hurdles that we face.
Brilliant. Thanks for that. Okay, I think that's pretty much everything from my end. I mean, what are the kind of next steps for you guys then after this? After you've gained comments, feedback on Commonwealth, what are the next steps?
Yeah, for sure. So it's a good one to ask here because, and that's why I actually included it in the original post because I figured like kind of a bit weird. But the way that we see these playing out is, so we have this. The next step for us would be to put up a snapshot proposal, and if the snapshot proposal passes, then we would go and basically that gives us a green light from the community that like the community is in favor of moving forward with this. And as such, it makes sense to begin engaging the legal counsel with regards to establishing the entity. obviously that's when we begin incurring costs, and we don't want to incur unnecessary costs ahead of a potential snapshot failure where the community doesn't think this is a good idea. And so once the snapshot is approved, if it is approved, then we would start working on drafting the trust agreement and kind of formalizing the entity, setting up the multi-sig and everything, so that as part of the on-chain proposal, which would follow, because this is going to have to be a short time lock proposal that spends funds from the community treasury to the Ops Trust multi-sig. Everything is set up so that by the time that on-chain vote is live, the community is voting, and if that vote passes, it actually formally, legally establishes the Guernsey Purpose Trusts, because it's through on-chain governance, right, that these trusts are enforced. And so that's how we're able to kind of establish the trust while also receiving the necessary funding. In short, the next step is snapshot proposal, then work on the entity, and then work on an on-chain proposal, and then get to work, assuming everything passes, obviously.
Excellent. Exciting. Awesome. Okay, that's everything from me. Is there anything else, Derek, Carl, is there anything you're in that you want to add to that? Any other things that you want to touch on? If not, we can open up the floor to a few people.
No, I think we covered everything. I'm super excited to hear questions from everybody here. I don't know if Derek has anything.
No, let's hear if anyone has questions.
Real. AX07, you're up.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yep, loud.
Hey, yeah.
Hey, how are you guys?
Good, thanks. How are you doing?
How are you doing?
Yeah, good, thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to ask, so with this subDAOs, how would the structure be with the being we sort of have like a DAO right now, and we propose things on the Commonwealth and we vote for them and all that. So now how would the structure be with subDAOs, and how many subDAOs do you think there would be in the future? So, or is it going to be just more one subDAO that creates another subDAO instead of the DAO creating lots of different subDAOs? I don't know if I explained it correctly.
Yeah, no, I think I see where you're going. Let me answer, and then you can tell me if I answered it. The idea is always for community members through the DAO to have full control over any subDAO that's being established, and to be responsible for the establishing of any new future subDAO. We would not expect a subDAO to be responsible for launching or holding accountable another subDAO. The subDAOs that are set up always report back to community members, which kind of acts as the DAO, right? The thing that we're trying to solve for here is improving decision-making and kind of making functions and protocol kind of ownership and growth and parameters and everything that goes into like managing a successful protocol more efficient through delegated authority, basically, to these different subDAO contributors based on their expertise and kind of their knowledge. So with regards to like how many subDAOs are established, it's very hard to say, right? You know, you have your obvious subDAOs that you can think of, like treasury management and allocation, kind of risk, like protocol risk and parameter setting, and then you have like growth, and then a lot of them have like meta governance, where it's just kind of a subDAO that looks back at the DAO and sees how to do things better. And you could potentially look at like a research subDAO, and that drives protocol experimentation through different works. But I could go on all day. But I think like the important thing is to always be sure that a subDAO has properly defined responsibilities and objectives, so that the community can adequately hold them accountable to a set of goals within a certain time frame. If we start setting up subDAOs where it's like, go do growth for a year without proper KPIs, that's where you're going to start seeing potential like inefficiencies and, at worst, bad actors who try to exploit the community for just its inability to hold them accountable. Did that answer?
Yeah, that was great. Yeah, thanks for that. So just a note. So what would you define as would the ambassador program be like a subDAO then? And then that subDAO had different well, I can't remember the word, but it was like different rows, like different agencies, you know. There was like the education, the boroughs, exactly. So would and then that's another subDAO. Those boroughs and all that would be another subDAO, or how would you define it, or what do you think about the ambassadors and subDAOs as
good question. So the way that we're envisioning it right now is you basically replace the ambassador program with the dYdX DAO, and then all of those boroughs are subDAO. So it kind of like goes up a level. Whether we would want to reestablish the ambassador program through its own subDAO that then assigns contributors different functions with regards to responsibilities is a question that would be open to the community if they felt strongly. It's interesting because it's like the functions that the ambassadors were doing might themselves be eligible for like their own subDAO, right? So like if you have like an education boroughs, I know the ambassadors had like an education boroughs that could probably be its own subDAO. Like the academy page, for example, could most likely be its own subDAO in the future. And there was like, I know there was risk that will most likely be its own subDAO. So what I imagine is a lot of the people who served as ambassadors, honestly, could be very, now well equipped to kind of go ahead and run and launch for possible subDAOs in the future, given their experience.
And Carl, just from my end, and so what you're doing with the Ops subDAO proposal is you're essentially creating a playbook for the community and or other service providers to come in and potentially set up a subDAO, providing that it kind of gets consensus from the community. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So the Ops subDAO, like the only responsibility it'll have beyond like the immediate like operational responsibilities is the creation of this DAO playbook that community members can turn to when they have an idea for what would be a new efficient subDAO to launch for the dYdX protocol. The Ops subDAO will not like be responsible for endorsing or like even being involved in any way with any sort of future subDAOs. It's really only doing that. After 6 months, we only said for 6 months, right? Because this was like how we saw the immediate responsibilities that could best benefit the protocol. After 6 months, based on how things go with regards to the protocol, is how we might come back and redefine the scope and outline a new set of responsibilities for the operations subDAO based on the needs of the protocol and the DAO. So we'll kind of like have to reassess in a few months, like what will this operations subDAO do? But for now, I think the playbook is really the best thing that can drive growth for the DAO.
Nice. Cool. AX07, anything else?
So yeah, just one last thing. So how would the voting then? What degree of like freedom would these subDAOs have in terms of, I don't know, like doing like some sort of a change? I don't know, for example, doing a giveaway, or I don't know, some other thing that they wanted to do. So what would be something that should be proposed to vote from the community? So you would have the delegators that have the delegating power to vote, and normal voters as well voting for it, or would how, like, what's the boundary there?
Yeah, so that's why it's important to properly define the subDAO and both its like capabilities and its objectives, right? We're seeing this develop across a few different protocols where they take a kind of optimistic governance approach where you give the subDAO the ability to do something with regards to the protocol, like lending community funds, adjusting risk parameters or whatever. And the community is responsible for kind of monitoring them and then vetoing their activity based on whether they think it actually is detrimental to the protocol or not. That is probably a bit further away right now. I think like immediately we can expect these subDAOs to be launched with not as far-reaching capabilities and objectives, but typically it'll be like, here's a budget of X amount, and you are responsible for carrying out these functions that are going to help the protocol in whatever way they're responsible for. For example, if you look at the dYdX ops trust, right, we're asking for funding to cover compensation and our costs, and then we're going to deliver on this objective of the playbook and setting up a bank account and all these other things. That's how I expect a lot of the subDAOs to be carried out. So like if you had like an Academy page subDAO, it would be like, here's X funding to pay for whatever providers you need to pay for yourselves, and your responsibility is to like publish more Academy content and manage the Academy website and keep it up to date, and you can kind of keep going there. And then when you get into like risk and that sort of thing is where, yeah, potentially they might have more direct control. Currently, at least, the way governance is set up, they would still need to publish a on-chain proposal that would need to go through traditional DAO parameters, right? Like they would need to do a short time lock or a long time lock proposal. Whether we want to adjust that and give particular groups some sort of optimistic privileges over protocol is, I think, it's a bit too early for us to say. But yeah, there is definitely different interpretations here.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much.
Cheers, mate. Cool. Nick, I'll bring you up.
Hello.
Hey, mate.
Hey, how's everybody doing?
Good. How you doing?
Good.
Hey, good.
So I just had a question. I understand now that the playbook is really a framework and not providing assistance to the creation of a subDAO. Well, it is, but not directly, right? So I'm curious though, what is the amount of legal work or knowledge required for a user to set up the subDAO using that? Like can a community member realistically take that with little to no legal knowledge and then create a subDAO in their whatever they specialize in?
Yeah, that's the goal. Effectively, I mean, you'll always need some sort of legal assistance. But I think part of the playbook can be like, here are friendly legal teams that you can turn to with this regard when it comes to establishing an entity. And we do hope to cover a lot of like the initial legal nuances that we've had to face when it comes to choosing an entity type, for example, when it comes to specific like jurisdictional barriers potentially, and like, yeah, kind of a lot of those. So the goal is definitely to make it as accessible as possible, so that anybody without any sort of prior understanding of like legal structuring with regards to entities can establish their own subDAO under obviously some guidance from an external legal advisor.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, guys.
Thanks,
Cool.
Nick. That's a great question. Thanks for that. Mo, let's bring you up in the meantime anyway. Yeah, I think that was a great question by Nick. I think that's often something that's in everyone's minds, right? Is like, okay, how do I get involved with this type of thing? And really trying to understand what's fully going on from like the setup of a legal entity and subDAO, etc. Hey, Mo.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yeah, got you.
Perfect. Hey, Carl. Hey, Derek. Quick question in regards to the latest All Hands by Antonio. He mentioned the importance of brand. So if you've got all of these subDAOs, anything that's creating content, for example, how do we ensure that first there's quality assurance at the end of it? Because they could make something that they think is of high standard, but when the product is eventually made, it doesn't quite meet up to the dYdX standards. And two, how are we overcoming this elephant in the room of all these subDAOs having different kind of basically not keeping to the brand or the risk of not keeping to the dYdX brand? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. That's where basically it shouldn't be. It should be easy. So here's what I'll say. The point of the playbook is to make it easy for anybody to submit a proposal and then like figure out how to launch a subDAO if they've been approved. But it should not be easy for anybody to just launch a subDAO that could have the type of implications that you're referring to with regards to potentially damaging the brand, right? Like we definitely want to make this process robust so that any subDAO that is approved by the community and by the DAO, we can kind of know that it's gone through proper diligence and has gone through these steps in order to ensure that these are good faith actors who know what they're doing, they're experts in their field, and that's why they've been approved to run this subDAO. And so you would effectively kind of, you know, when it comes to this brand one, it's a good point, because that one, yeah, I mean, there's like an element of like you are relying on them always making the right decision, and that might not always be the case. But this is kind of an issue with whatever, you know, you can talk about anything, like could be treasury management as well. They can make a mistake that damages the treasury of the DAO at the end of the day. And so that's where if you properly align incentives so that rewards are attributed based on performance and not just as a flat structure, you ensure that they're, at least for the most part, always acting in good faith in order to maximize their own profit, right, from like a profitability standpoint and their kind of commitment to the protocol. You know, when it comes to this sort of like externally facing thing, like, yeah, that is a risk, definitely, of establishing like a brand facing subDAO. But it's just one that the community will have to bear in order to grow and establish these subDAOs.
Yeah, and just to kind of double down on that, I think also it's why it's really important to have like a really clear mission, vision, and values for the dYdX DAO. I know it's really difficult to, I guess, maintain and monitor how people are sort of upholding the brand, but essentially, if all subDAOs are adhering to a similar like value prop and values that are public, I think that will hopefully uphold them to that those mission, vision, and values, which I think are really important for the DAO.
That makes sense. Brilliant. Thanks a lot for that. And just as a follow-up question, so you mentioned that you reward individuals. So for subDAOs, are you thinking of introducing KPI metrics where if they over exceed expectations for the brand, then they unlock additional rewards? Is that what you meant by that comment, or is that me presuming here?
You could probably set it up that way, yeah. I mean, you can obviously get pretty creative with compensation structures so as to best incentivize commitment and like and contributions on behalf of subDAO contributors. Yeah, I'm sure you can play around with the compensation. It'll obviously vary probably by subDAO, where some subDAOs can follow specific KPIs like user growth or like whatever it might be, you know, like actually like analytical KPIs. Other ones might have less tangible ones, and so you have to drive more towards like qualitative ones, right? But
yeah,
kind of like what we have with the subDAO here, where we're holding ourselves accountable to the KPI of delivering the playbook. It might be something like that, more like project based. But yeah, no, that's for sure. I mean, there's no real set way of compensating contributors. I absolutely see that being a possibility.
Yeah.
Okay, no worries. Thanks.
And Mo, on that as well, like I think it just varies depending on sort of like what the proposal and what incorporates that in that subDAO. Whoever starts that subDAO, I mean, essentially they should be, I would assume, documenting, detailing down what they expect to achieve over time. And if they do have some incentive structure that potentially increases or decreases depending on hitting certain KPIs, then I think it's up to the community to really look at that and go, right, that does make sense. And so if someone does put proposals up for that, then again, community members can decide if that's appropriate and or not appropriate.
Yeah, it makes sense. Thanks, everyone. That's all the questions I had.
Thanks, Mo.
Cool. Thank you.
Cool. Mirash, we'll bring you up.
Hey guys, thanks for this panel. It's been really, really informative and helpful. Just a quick question. So moving into V4 and all these subDAOs, how do you envision the transition of all of the assets and brand image that has already been created? Like, are those tools and assets something that subDAOs will have access to? I'm thinking primarily for marketing, brand image purposes, all that good stuff.
To be honest, probably not something that I can speak to individually, right? Like that'll be the protocol's decision, I imagine, and all of us as community members to decide like how we manage our protocol assets. I would imagine, right? I mean, if now I'm just kind of like speaking to without an answer, really. But yeah, I think like definitely, I would see the community benefiting from like a shared assets bank that we can all turn to when it comes to generating content. That, you know, not to like get too like repetitive or meta here, but that could probably be a subDAO, right? Like managing like. I mean, like a media subDAO or something like that like generates like content on behalf of other subDAOs when they're doing publication. And to Mo's earlier point, in order to maintain consistent branding, that could be one of subDAO's responsibilities. Is like we do all of like the external content on behalf of other subDAOs, so that we maintain consistent quality and like branding awareness when it comes to the content that's distributed across the web. But yeah, unfortunately, I don't really have like an immediate answer as to how assets would be shared in a V4 setting.
No, that makes sense. It's just dYdX has such a great brand image already, and I know from working with just with the team, with the community, and with the ambassador program, we have so many assets to leverage on that front. It would just be a shame if they weren't used. So hopefully, we can find a way to keep those around moving forward.
Yeah, totally agree. I'm sure we can all collectively figure out a good way to address that.
Awesome, thanks.
Thanks, Marash. Cool. It's been going 50 minutes. Let's close this off then. Thanks for your time, Carl and Derek. That's been really, really helpful. I think it really provides a clearer picture for everyone in the community on what the role will be of the Ops subDAO, and it definitely really helps to hear it in person, having a thorough explanation, and really for people to get an understanding of what the kind of, I guess, objective of forming it is. So thanks for your time and coming on.
Awesome. Yeah, I really appreciate all the questions, and of course, thank you, James, as always, for hosting us. Yeah, I mean, like we said, for us, the next step will be moving forward with a snapshot to gauge community receptiveness to this idea. And based on that, we'll move forward. But ahead of that, happy to answer any more questions. Feel free to give us your comments or feedback on the existing thread, or just ping us directly anywhere. And I'm more than happy to keep talking about this. It's kind of our passion. So it's like what we spend all day thinking about anyways. So it's always great to be able to do here.
Good to hear. Awesome. Thanks everyone for listening in and for your questions. I'll try and get this out on YouTube by the end of, I guess, today, my time, so tomorrow morning for most people. And then if anyone wants to re-listen to it, by all means, then they can. Cool. Until next time, guys. See you all later. Thanks.
Great. Bye, everyone.